I just unmuted it.
Okay. It's slightly early. I was thinking about getting for a couple minutes because everyone has to park in the back and come around front. We'll start slow. So we are recording this. This slideshow is also on our website. It's on the RID website. If you need to come back and listen to this again, you're welcome to.
Okay, so before we get started, a couple things. So since we are recording it and we have people on Zoom, when we get to the point in time where you're asking questions, I need you to come up to the microphone to ask the question so people on Zoom can hear it as well. Otherwise, they're going to be going, "What do you say? What do you say?" Okay, same thing with the presenters. So you can talk from this microphone so that it can be picked up on Zoom as well as in the audience.
So we can't.
You'll be, as long as you're close to that.
Okay, if I stand here, that's going to be heard on the recording. Okay, and then if you are on Zoom, you can ask questions too. And I think I saw that everybody has their mute on during the talk, but.
Would you introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm getting there.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Just getting oriented.
The other thing is you're hard to hear. So I'm sure it's not easy for them on there.
I will speak loudly.
There you go.
Okay, my name is Adam Sullivan. I'm the Nevada State Engineer. I recognize many of you in this room, but for those of you who I haven't met, I've been on the job for a little over a year and been with the Division of Water Resources for about 12 years or so. And I'll introduce our panel behind me. This is Chad Walling. He's our drilling supervisor for the division. Wyatt Faraday is the water resources specialist, which means that if you're dealing with permits in the basin, you're most likely going to be talking with Wyatt. Kip Allender is a hydrogeologist with our office, and AJ Jensby is also a water resource specialist, and AJ will be out a lot this year. If you see white truck driving around, that might be AJ. And so each of us will have our presenting part of this presentation today. Just some opening remarks to get started. We had this same meeting in Smith on Monday night, and there were about 80 people there. It went for about 2 hours. And so I expect tonight, maybe we'll go for 2 hours. We're hoping to get done at 7, but if we could, there might be another meeting in this room at 7. So we're shooting to be done at 7. The reason for this meeting is we've just been getting a lot of calls, and there's just general concern about the current drought that we're in, about the potential for water levels drawing down and potential redrills or wells drying up, and also whether or not the state is going to curtail any water rights. And just to get this out there, the state is not going to be implementing any kind of curtailment on groundwater rights this year in Smith and Mason Valley. It's really, it's too late in the year at this point. You know, as of New Year's, we thought we were in for a really big year, and that all vaporized. And at this point, you know, from the farming perspective, any kind of curtailment that would have to happen would need to be sort of communicated with much earlier than where we're at right now. So, and then on top of that, you know, from my perspective, curtailment is really a last resort. I think we learned a lot in 2015, 2016 about what that process could be, what the alternatives might be, and there clearly are things that can be done that would be better for the community and for the people directly affected than strict curtailment. So we want to introduce that a little bit, but you know, the other thing is that clearly the groundwater resource in both in Smith and Mason Valley is there's issues, there's problems, there's chronic drawdown, groundwater level decline, And really why we're here tonight is to share the data that we have that we're looking at. The way we're going to do this is Wyatt, and I'll advance the slide here. Not sure how to advance the slide. Do I point it over here or over there?
You tell me next slide, I'll move.
Okay. So the way we're going to do this is Wyatt's going to start off, and he's going to go through some basic water rights stuff. And I know this is going to be at least some of it very familiar to most of you, but still, for the sake of having common baseline and getting some basic concepts agreed, out front, like, as far as like who we are and what our responsibility is in relationship with the irrigation district and the water master and so on. While we'll go through some of that, then Kip is going to kind of walk through some of the hydrogeologic data and some of the characterizations for what we're seeing in specifically Mason Valley, but both Smith and Mason. And then Chad will be talking about drilling regulations, and if you are in a situation of having to re-drill or lower your pump, kind of what the rules are and what you need to know as a well owner. And then I'll finish it off with some concluding remarks and some talking about enforcement that we're looking at this year, and sort of looking forward what some options might be from our perspective. Let's see, and then we want to make sure to have time for questions. Okay. Thanks again to the county for letting us use this room, and I will turn it over to Wyatt to miss the slide. That's what I said.
Adam just went through that slide. All right, thanks, Adam. You can go to the next slide, please. So I'm going to give a pretty brief overview of how water rights work in the Walker River region. I'm, again, the water resource specialist at the state of Nevada. So first of all, there's two types of basic water rights. The first being surface water rights and the other being groundwater rights. Those are kind of the two main types. For surface water rights, there's two types of that. And I know this is pretty basic for a lot of you folks, especially the farmers, but the first type is the Walker River decree rights. And those are based entirely upon the prior appropriation doctrine. What they say is first in time, first in right. So if you have a senior right, you get your water, you get to keep diverting your water to your fields longer, whereas when the river decline drops, the junior decree right holders get cut off. So senior rights get water longer than junior rights. These are managed by the federal water master in Yerington. The other type of surface water rights, should say also used for agriculture, are the storage rights, and these are allocated by the Walker River Irrigation District, which works closely with the federal water master in Yerington. These are based upon an annual storage allocation. So if we have a good winter and the reservoirs are full, all the farmers get a little bit more to put on their fields. The storage water is stored in Bridgeport over in California and Topaz on the Nevada-California border. Topaz has a storage capacity of about 60,000 acre feet, while Bridgeport is about 42,000 acre feet. And I believe this year, with the drought, the allocation is quite low. I think it's 34% in Topaz and 26% in Bridgeport. So if you're a farmer and you have 100 acre feet of storage, then you get 34 acre feet of that this year. Next slide, please. So groundwater rights, that's where the state comes in, the Division of Water Resources at the state of Nevada, we manage these. However, we do manage the groundwater rights in conjunction with how surface water rights for irrigation are managed. So as far as groundwater irrigation rights go, we also break those down into two different types, if you will. The first type of groundwater irrigation right is a primary groundwater right. And so that's a right that can be used up to its full duty independently of whatever surface water rights you might own or not own, and anytime during the irrigation season. A supplemental groundwater right is only intended to make up the shortage on your surface water for a given season. So how that works is if you get some portion from surface water, you make up the rest from groundwater, but you're limited to 4 acre-feet per acre in the Walker River region. So from all sources, that being primary groundwater, supplemental groundwater, and surface water. So diving in a little bit more into the groundwater rights, and this is a chart that's displaying groundwater rights, not just for irrigation, but all types of uses. And this includes both supplemental and primary rights. And what we see are about 8 to 10 different types of uses. But the major takeaway here is that irrigation dominates both in the committed resource and in the actual pumpage. Here, the green is what we call committed resource or appropriations. So that's how much water rights are on the books. The blue is what was actually pumped last year. So you can see pretty much every type is not quite pumped to its full extent, the rights that are on paper, but irrigation is what is really driving the usage in both Smith and Mason Valleys, about 80% of the total use in Mason Valley. Now, Smith Valley, I know we're in Mason Valley today, so this is just a reference, but Smith Valley is even more dominated by irrigation for agriculture. About 90% of the water use goes to irrigation, 95% even in Smith Valley. I will also point out on both of these figures, domestic is on there. However, domestic is not typically a water right. Almost all of that is generated from a query of the number of domestic wells in each basin. So those are not actual water rights for domestic, just totals of domestic wells. Domestic wells are exempt from requiring a water right. So this figure is showing the surface water flows, the Walker River flows coming into Mason Valley as compared to groundwater pumping for irrigation purposes in Mason Valley. And what we see here is a really strong inverse relationship between water flow in the river, discharge in the river, compared to pumping for farming. Basically, this is the effect that you get from supplemental groundwater use, where when the river's flowing well and everyone is in priority on their decree, there's a lot of storage, you can irrigate your season throughout the year with surface water and you don't need to turn on your well. So those high flow years, we see pumpage really drop through the floor. Last year was the first season in Smith Valley and Mason Valley where Order 1318, State Engineers Order 1318 was in effect. What this order did was required everyone with a groundwater right of 5 acre-feet or more to report monthly meter readings to our office of the state. Domestic wells, stock water wells, and any well with a total duty, water right duty under 5 acre-feet is exempt from the order. So this really just targeted larger water rights because there are a number, especially in Smith Valley, there's quite a few water rights that are below 5 acre-feet. This was really successful. We got almost, I would say 80%, 85% of groundwater users reporting their monthly meter readings to us. We developed this website and users can log in and easily submit a reading and the date. And it's really been helpful to us because it's really been able to give us real-time data of groundwater pumpage as it's happening. So thank you all water users out there who have been compliant with that. As we like to say, you can't manage what you can't measure. So it's good for us, and it's also a tool for the farmers and the water users out there, so they can see what they're using month to month. It's a pretty slick tool.
You guys need to speak up a little bit. Zoom is having some problems here, guys, so.
Okay, thank you. So this slide is going over what Adam kind of alluded to, and he'll be talking about a little bit more at the end of the presentation, but I just wanted to throw these numbers out here. Last year in Smith Valley, we had about 450 acre feet that were over pumped in cumulative total out of a couple wells. And then in Mason Valley, we had upwards of 6,000 acre feet that was over pumped. The water right duties, that was more about 12 to 15 wells in Mason Valley just last year. So, that's concerning. There's water right holders out there that didn't comply with their permit terms. And we're going to be taking a closer look at that. With that, I'm going to pass it off to Kit.
All right, thank you, Wyatt. Thank you, Adam. So Adam introduced me, Kip Allender, hydrogeologist with the Division of Water Resources. I just started there last summer, but prior to that, I've been working in Nevada water science and water resource issues for the last 30 years, and I was with the USGS Nevada Water Science Center. And I spent a lot of that time, upwards of 20 years, here in the Walker River Basin. So I have a lot of background doing hydrologic science in the Walker River Basin. So what I want to do is talk to everybody about the current conditions out there, the current water supply conditions. I think everybody's pretty aware that things didn't quite turn out well this year. Want to talk about the status of the current drought, and then talk more about what that means to our systems out here, to our groundwater systems and to our river, and look at some of the data and some of the analysis that's been done recently at the change in storage, the long-term change in storage in Smith and Mason Valleys, and then talk about what that means for the river and the ability for the river to convey water. So starting off, the chart on the left here is the snow water equivalent plot that's produced by the NRCS from their snowtail stations. This is representative for the Walker River Basin. It's a compilation of the 7 snowtail stations that exist in the headwaters. This is updated daily. We pulled this data as of last week, April 5th. And I just want to kind of walk through what we saw this season, which everybody's pretty familiar with. We started off in the water year, October 1st, but in October, we had some really good rain. And it was very, very wet month of October. It doesn't show up here very well because it's just a little blip, because there wasn't a whole lot of snow with that. It was just high elevation snow. Low elevation, it was just mostly rain, but there was a lot of moisture, and it really helped to moisten the soils. And then, of course, November came, and it was a dry month. The beginning of December is dry, and then, of course, everybody remembers December. It was an amazing month. It was one of the wettest months we've ever had, and our snow water equivalent jumped up to over 70% for the whole year. Now, and at that time, as I'm sure most people in the room were just thinking, "Gosh, this is going to be a great year. This is good that it happened. We might actually bust out of the drought this year," and that's what we were hoping for. But as you can see, it turned in January, it turned flat. We didn't get a drop in January, and we hardly got anything in February, and only small storms in March. And so, we have a completely flat curve from the beginning of the year. There hasn't been any increase in the snow water in the snowpack. We call this the right angle SWE year, the right angle snow water equivalent year, because it's got a very unique shape that we haven't ever really seen before. So. And the other characteristic is you can see that it starts to take that downturn there in March before April, where the snowpack's starting to melt because of warmer temperatures and warmer conditions. And what that means is when it starts running off earlier, the snow's going to come off earlier. That means we're going to get to lower river flows sooner this year, unless we had a very cold spring. But this week's been exceptional. And the drive-in on Monday was in a blizzard, so that was kind of unique. So. For comparison, that blue line up there is what the snow water equivalent looked like last year. And so if you look at just the height of the curve, how high they got, it's almost the same. So we're actually looking at about the same amount of snow in the mountains this year as last year, with the big difference being runoff has started earlier this year and started coming off the mountain earlier. And now just for comparison, the median, the green line, that's what your typical year is. What it looks like, that's what the snowpack would look like. So we're about 25% under that median peak. So effectively, we're still in a drought. We did not bust the drought this year, unfortunately. So what's this all mean for our water supply? Now we're moving to the right. This is the snapshot of the Walker River Basin Hydromapper that's hosted by the USGS, and we'll have a link at the end of the presentation, as well as a whole bunch of the other resources that we're showing, so that everybody can get access to this data and information. But this is what the Hydromapper shows is it shows a snapshot of the water conditions and the water supply and the stream flows throughout the entire watershed every day, and it's updated every day, and it's actually updated every hour. So this is as of last week, April 5th. This is the conditions. I think maybe there's a little bit more water in the reservoir right now, but this is essentially what is in there right now. So Topaz is about 57% full. So it's 57% of the total storage is in the reservoir right now. So compared to last year, that was at 27%. So we are looking a little better in Topaz Reservoir, Topaz Lake compared to last year. Bridgeport, we're looking at about 43% currently, or as of last week. And then last year was only at 35%. So a little bit more water there. That's good, but it's still, the reservoirs are, if you look at the two combined, it's only about half the normal supply. The reason that we do have that bump up this year, even though our snowpack was similar, is from those October storms, because we got low elevation runoff from the mountains that were able to be stored in October. And so those kind of helped pre-charge those reservoirs last year. Now looking downstream, Weber Reservoir, the situation is a little reversed there. Last year, at the beginning of the year, it was at 94% full, whereas this year it's only at 42%. And then Walker Lake, just looking at Walker Lake, that's 46% is down from 50% last year, and that's in terms of the restoration goals set by the National Wildlife Fish and Wildlife Foundation. So, and that didn't go up at all this year. So that's the current water supply picture for the reservoirs in the system. Oh, sorry, next slide. So drought stats. So we're looking right here at the Drought Monitor and what it looks like for the state of Nevada. We're focusing on Lyon County, of course, which is the unique shape county right here. And looking at last week compared to last year, it does show that there's been some improvement across the state. The red, the moderate red is extreme conditions, and there was more extreme conditions across the state last year than there was last week. And so looking at, even though Lyon County was really in the severe stage last year, it currently is in the severe, we say it's probably just a little bit less severe, but it's still drought. And we're in our going into our third year here. So that's the current status with what's going on with drought in the area. So this is a slide that we threw in here to the previous slide. The previous slide, the Drought Monitor relies on information that's collected on the ground. It's based on reservoir levels, snowpack, river flows, soil moisture, and all this information is composited and compiled by the University of Nebraska Lincoln, and they create those reports. And some of the local agencies, the state climatologist, the University of Nevada, Reno, our office are involved in reporting the conditions for our state. And one of the things they like to do is try to get reports from the field. And so we're throwing this out for everybody to be aware of, that if you wanted to report conditions from your area, from your ranch, or from where you're at, this is the website you can go to. And they use that information to try to really dial in the drought status for the whole region. So we just want to make sure everybody's aware of this resource to help contribute to our understanding of the current drought status. Next slide, Jeff. All right, so now we're going to start talking about what's going on with the groundwater system in Smith and Mason Valleys. This slide shows our division's monitoring network. So all these green triangles are the wells that we monitor in Smith and Mason Valleys. In the Mesa Valley, we have about 106 monitoring sites. And in Smith Valley, we have about 37 monitoring sites. There's also a complementary network monitored by the USGS, and which complements this. Those sites aren't shown here, but those are the data that we look at to get a sense of what's going on with the aquifer. The next slides I'm going to show are going to show, can you go back one real quick? I'm going to show these locations. The locations for these hydrographs. The one in Smith Valley is this red star. So it's kind of in the middle. It's in the middle of these three triangles right here, just north of the river. And then for Mason Valley, it's this blue star that's way south of us right here. Okay. So this is the representative hydrograph for Smith Valley. This is one of the things we're looking at, and that's really caught our attention. You can see that the hydrograph goes back to 1969. That's when the first measurements were being made. The first investigations were being done out here to characterize the water resources. And so this is a very long-term record that really helps us to see what's going on over a long period of time. You see the long period decline here is about 1.2 feet per year. And it's been steadily declining over these years. But what we want to bring everybody's attention to is what's happening during the drought. You know, because the idea is that during drought years, it kind of depletes the groundwater system, and then during wet years, it's recharged by all the water that comes through the area, and those are supposed to balance out over time. But what we're seeing is that our droughts are happening more frequently and they're a little bit more severe, and our wet periods are a little less frequent. And so what we're seeing is these sharp declines are not being offset by the increases. And so I'm talking about this decline right here, this decline from the previous drought. This is a recovery that happened in 2017 through 2019 during the wet year, but it just isn't enough to offset from the previous drought. But what we're seeing this year, and that's really is alarming to me, is the rate of decline that we're seeing in Smith Valley, which was 11 feet per year at this well. And that was in excess of what we saw in the previous drought, which was only 6.7 feet per year. So that's just one well, but across the whole valley, we've got this little table right here that shows that the average of all our measured wells was 7.4 feet during this recent drought period, 7.4 feet per year, whereas the last drought was 5 feet per year. So we're seeing an increase in the rate of declines. Now, the reason this is alarming is that the amount of flow in the river was not that much less in 2022 than it was in the previous drought, yet our declines are greater. And the water use wasn't that much, it wasn't that much different than the previous droughts. And so, but yet we're seeing steeper declines. And so that's telling me that the aquifer is changing as it's getting lower and lower. It's changing in its nature. And it's, you know, it could be either that if you pictured it as a bowl, the bowl's getting smaller, or if you think of it in terms of aquifer properties, the storage, the amount of water stored per cubic volume of material is getting less. And so for the same amount of pumping, we're getting greater declines. And so that's a big concern. And that's why we're here talking to you about this, because we're seeing this in Smith Valley. Oh, next slide. And we're seeing it in Mason Valley. Okay, again, the declines to this recent drought greater than the declines in the previous drought. The long term here is 0.3 feet per year. The recent decline 5.4 feet per year, and the previous drought was 4.2 feet per year. So you look at that and you think, well, compared to Mason Valley or compared to Smith Valley, that's not as bad. And you can say that, but I got some other news to tell you in a minute. You look at the average declines for the recent drought, 4 feet per year, and then the previous drought was 3.4 feet per year. So even though the declines aren't as much here, we're still seeing the same thing is occurring, the same condition where it's for the same amount of pumping, we're getting greater declines, and that's a concern. Okay. So now there's been some recent work done by the USGS that was recently presented at the 2020 at our Nevada Water Resources Association conference, and this is work by Gwen Davies and Ramon Naranjo. That shows the big picture declines in these two basins, 50-year decline from 1970 to 2020. And so that's what these charts have shown, is that total water level decline. The bright red that we're looking at in Smith Valley down in the southern end is greater than 100 feet of decline in the 50 years. The orange is between 50 and 100 feet of decline, and then you can see it's, as you get closer to the center of the valley, it's not as big a decline, right where the river is moving through the valley. And that's because the river recharges the aquifer system and helps hold up those water levels through the valleys. In Mason Valley, we don't see as bright of colors. The declines aren't as extensive, if you will. We do see some large declines up in the north end of the basin here, but it's not as widespread. And the reason for that is the characteristic of recharge and the interaction with the river system. Smith Valley the river crosses it across the short axis. There's not as much of an extensive network of canals and ditches to route the surface water, the irrigation water around the valley to recharge the system. Whereas in Mason Valley, the river is more efficient at recharging the groundwater system. And so we see that, and it has a much more dense network of ditches and canals that help distribute that water across the valley and recharge it across the valley. But regardless, both basins have a similar characteristic where along the river corridors, water levels aren't declining much, but as you move away and you move to the margins of the valleys, we start seeing big declines. And in Smith Valley, we're seeing extreme declines of over 100 feet that are having impact on people's ability to lift water. The total storage change, the total amount of water that's been removed from the groundwater storage in Smith Valley is almost 290,000 acre feet. That's 5 topaz reservoirs. In Mason Valley, it is around 270,000 acre feet, and that's equivalent to around 6 Bridgeport reservoirs. So although the water levels are declining more in Smith Valley, and it seems like Mason Valley is not as bad, remember that is because the river is helping to recharge the aquifer system. So when we go to the next slide, you'll see, well, what's that mean for the river? So these slides, these are also from Gwen Davies and Ramon Naranjo. These show the efficiency of the rivers through the valley. So the left chart there is showing stream efficiency through Smith Valley, and the right chart is showing this river efficiency through Mason Valley. So let me tell you what stream efficiency is before we go into this much, because you need to understand this concept. Stream efficiency is the ability of the river channel to convey that water through the valley from the entrance of the valley to the exit of the valley, accounting for the diversions out of the river. So if all the water that comes in and you count for all the diversions makes it out of the valley, we call that 100% efficient or 1.0 efficiency. And that means it's a steady stream or steady river. If it gains water and accumulates water moving through the valley, like from irrigation return flow or from natural recharge, then it's a gaining river, and that has a higher efficiency than 1. And if it's a losing river and it's losing flow, it has a lower efficiency than 1. And so that's what these charts are showing. And it's showing the river efficiency through time, starting from the 40s and for the 40s in Mesa Valley and the 50s in Smith Valley. And it's just for irrigation season when the decree is in play. So what we see for the West Walker River through Smith Valley is that was dominantly a gaining river through time. All the irrigation return flows, and as well as from natural recharge from Desert Creek into the groundwater basin, as well as the creeks off the Pine Nut Mountains. Their recharged groundwater system and the water table was sufficient to allow groundwater to move and discharge into the river. And so it was a gaining system, and it was gaining for a long time. And then the recent decades, it started becoming a little bit losing occasionally. And now, most recently, what we're seeing is that the losing conditions and the gaining conditions are almost equal. And if the drought continues, we expect, and the water use patterns continue, we expect that the West Walker River through Smith Valley is going to become a losing stream. And that's what the current forecast is based on the current use and continued drought. For the Walker River through Mason Valley, let me step back. The loss rate for Smith Valley is 3% per decade. That's how much that the river's loss rates increase. Is every decade it increases by 3%. For Mason Valley, it was not as strongly of a gaining river initially, but and occasionally went to losing, but what we're seeing is it's becoming more of a losing dominated river in recent decades, and it's declining. The thing about the Walker River through Mason Valley is that loss rate, that decrease in the flow efficiency is 5% per decade. So it's higher than it is for the West Walker through Smith Valley. And that's because the river's more efficient at recharging the aquifer system in Mason Valley than in Smith Valley. Next slide. So what does that mean? And what we're seeing is it's a feedback cycle that we're in right now. You know, so we have this increased flow loss in the river system, which means we're not getting as much decree and storage deliveries and surface water deliveries to the farms. And so we're using more supplemental pumping in order to make up for that. And then the pumping increases the flow losses, which creates a cycle. And that's we're in the cycle right now, and we need to start to think about how to break out of this cycle. That's why we're here. Okay, and and this slide is related to the East Walker River above Mason Valley, and it's related to some large losses that we were seeing last year on the East Walker. There was a hypothesis that that it was due to a channel realignment that occurred during 2017 in the Flying M Ranch Reach. The Irrigation District, the USGS, and our office went out and made a whole series of measurements last year to see if we can pinpoint what was going on. And we wanted to make sure we shared these results so everybody knows it was not, in fact, the channel realignment on the Flying M Ranch, because it showed a very slight gain last summer. And then the ranch below, the Raptor 7 Ranch Reach, showed a slight loss, 10% loss. But we're seeing all the loss occurring along the Santa Margarita Ranch, just above the USGS Gross-Snyder gauge. And so that's where we're seeing a lot of the losses last year, and that's what's happening on the East Walker. But the reality is it was because the flows are so low, loss rates look higher when the flows are lower. The actual losses were not terribly different than they were in 2014 as far as the magnitude of flow, which is around 30 to 40 CFS was being lost between Bridgeport and Straw-Snyder. All right, so this is the last slide for me. This is kind of a summary. We're seeing a decades-long decline in water levels in Smith and Mason Valleys. Smith Valley, of course, a little bit steeper declines than Mason Valley, but that's because the river's more efficient at recharging Mason Valley than it is Smith Valley, and because of the distribution of all the ditches and the canals. The most recent drought has similar water levels in Mason, but much lower water levels in Smith Valley. And then, you know, the use of supplemental water during drought conditions really does have this effect at reducing the flow efficiency of the Walker River, which is greater. This effect is more amplified in Mason Valley than in Smith Valley. So with that, I think that's my presentation. Next slide, Jeff. Yeah. So it's Chad's turn.
Thank you, Kip. Again, my name is Chad Walling, and not too long ago, I had the same job that Wyatt does now, so it's nice to see some familiar faces again. It's been a little while since I've been out here, but now with the division, I manage our well drilling regulations section and adjudication sections. That's what my slides are talking about. Is a little bit about well drilling, and it's a little bit veer from what we've been talking about the hydrology, and these are kind of just looking at some trends that we've seen. And I think it kind of relates to the long-term effects coupled with the recent spikes in water level declines. We've seen a little bit of an uptick in a trend in the demand for redrilling or deepening existing wells. It's from a little bit more digging that I've done. It's not necessarily unique to these valleys, but it is something that's occurring. Naturally, the shallower the well is, the shallower wells are a little more susceptible to be deepened or redrilled. Smith Valley, I'll speak quickly. We saw quite a bit more drastic demand for domestic wells, a little more balanced here in Mason Valley, but the trends you can see starting in 2013 to the recent years, it's just a little bit higher as those water levels have been declining. So the next couple slides I want to talk about is just kind of informative to give you some basic information that you need to know in case you find yourself in need of well drilling services. Next slide. So we license well drillers in the state, licensed through our office. They are required to maintain and renew their licenses every year, take continuing education units, and keep in good practice. And because of that, we also have the regulations for well drilling practices. And so with that, the couple things that I wanted to mention, the activities that require through our regulation a licensed well driller to perform the work, and what a well drilling service as defined is. That includes drilling, plugging, or rehabilitation of a well. Rehabilitation is not a very clear word, a very clear definition in its own right. So it summarizes as a material change in the design or the construction of an existing well. So that would include things like deepening, doing anything to change the casing, the perforations, the sanitary seal, or anything of that nature. So those are the types of activities that do require a licensed well driller to perform the work. The next slide, talk about some services that don't necessarily require a licensed driller to do it, that if you still need some service done on your well or your pump. And the primary thing we call is reconditioning, and in other words, that's cleaning out the well. So that's brushing it, chemical treatment, surging it, or anything that involves pump work. So if that requires, lowering the pump, changing it out, that's not something that we regulate. So we like to show this picture. Your Mercedes-Benz pump, if you can get it to work, is fine by us. One of the things we wanted to highlight, though, that was a little bit of a concern, and one of the reasons that we wanted to throw some slides in here is to have you understand what the basic needs that you have if you need well service done, and understand that you're working with a licensed driller if that's what it requires. We do have a comprehensive list that's kept up to date of drillers that are licensed with our office that's available on our website. And just the couple basic things that every driller needs to do if they're going to perform some work, they have to submit what's called a notice of intent. They have to basically request our approval to do their drilling activity. And we have to approve that before they can commence the work. So if that's drilling a new well, deepening, any of those things that we talked about that requires a well drilling service, they have to submit an intent to do that work, and we have to approve it before they can begin. Once they're done, they're required to also submit a well driller's report or a well log to our office within 30 days. So for those of you that may or may not need well services at some point, these are some precautions you can take, I guess, to make sure that your driller is doing the things that they're supposed to do by our regulation. If you have any questions, please, our drilling staff takes calls all the time. That's what they do. They're really good at it. So please call our office if you have any questions about drilling activity. And the last bullet here is just another caution. We did have some reports coming out of the Winnemucca area of some people getting scammed, people offering drilling services, seeking deposits, and disappearing. So again, make sure that the person that you're working with is licensed. Make sure if you need to get a hold of us, that they're following through with their commitments. Just to be careful. So that's really it for the drilling side. Keep it kind of short, and I'll turn it back over to Adam to wrap us up here. Thanks.
We are right on time. So here I want to start summarizing this and talk about some future outlooks and takeaways from what we're covering here and information that Kip's going over. I like this hydrograph in Smith Valley, I think, really tells the story. It's a good kind of a reminder to put this up, that Smith Valley and Mason Valley both are really responsive to wet periods and dry periods. It's pretty unique around the state, even in other river dominated basins, to have that quick of a recharge in a big wet year and this much drawdown in dry years. But really the as Kip was describing in great detail. The concern is this long-term trend. And, what does that mean for these basins going into the future? Because we're just not seeing the kind of recovery, even in these big wet years, to support as much pumping as is going on now. So again, the state is not curtailing this year. It's really a last resort. But, as far as water law goes, that is the main tool that is provided to deal with shortage. Not enough to go around. Curtailment that's what water law provides for. And as those of you who were irrigating in 2015 and 2016 remember how that went, as that was the response from our office. This is our responsibility to sort of propose that, and because that's what water law provides for, and that was not successful. But what was successful, especially in 2015, is that there was a big reduction in pumping, and it was just, as in my understanding, was just fallen on a voluntary basis. The fact that we were talking about curtailment as a possibility led people to pump less, and in fact, that had an effect on the basin, and it just indicates that there's probably better ways to deal with this than requirements for curtailment. So curtailment is avoidable. There isn't a lot of precedent around the state, and with what our office has done with coming up with alternative methods to reduce pumping, or come up with groundwater management plans or support groundwater management plans that are developed by local communities. But there is a lot of room and opportunity for that. And we're not just here, but in other parts of the state, we're trying to communicate or get ideas and support concepts that will work best for local economies and people that are directly affected by this, to support long-term water conservation. One of the things that I want to emphasize is, and there's also often a lot of confusion, that if you're not pumping up to your full duty, that you're at risk of losing your water right, forfeiture or cancellation. And I want to emphasize that people, if you're an active water user and you're reducing your use during dry years to either protect your wells or support the aquifer, that's just good water management. And the state is not, you're not at risk of losing the water right. That's the situation that we're in. That's an important part of just smart water management. My last point is continuing public outreach. So we have been starting to talk with both within our own office, with the district, with some of the irrigators, about ideas that we can cooperate with on long-term water management strategies. And we would plan to be out back again in the fall, sharing the data for pumping for this year, water levels, and just keeping a dialogue going. Next slide. So what we can do, and we need to do this year, is enforcement of, particularly with over pumping. At that slide that Wyatt put up with 2 blue bars, and it's like 6,000 acres last year over pumping in Mason Valley. That's something that as the state agency, we feel like we have the responsibility to work with those individuals to keep them pumping within their permitted terms. And really, there are very few wells and very few individuals who are in that category. And we don't have a lot of specific guidance within water law. Traditionally, there's just been a lot of working on the honor system, and in almost all cases, people don't overpump what their permanent water right is, and that's work. But in the situation that we're in, with the decline that we're seeing this year, we have intent to really kind of work with individuals and prevent that from happening again. Let's see. So next slide. Here's some online resources that was mentioned earlier, both at the Division of Water Resources website and also at the USGS website. You can obtain a lot of this information as well as a lot more as far as you can look at the hydrographs for each one of these wells that we monitor. There's a ton of data if you spend the time digging into that website to keep yourself apprised of what information is available. Next slide. Are there any questions? Yes, ma'am.
Ma'am, we take you folks come with us.
And if you have any questions for any of the presentations, feel free to come up and target that to any of us.
Is this on? I speak very well in the back, but not very well. Hi, I'm Leanna Carey. I own the Progressive Rancher magazine, and it's nice to be able to travel a little bit and get to see everyone. And it does look like you guys are working really hard, and thank you for this really wonderful report. I have a whole list of questions, but I think the one that really floats to the top is, if someone's over pumping, shouldn't the other farmer, rancher, public know? I'm a rancher, I'm a farmer, and if my neighbor was taking water out of the canal and using a bunch of my water that I should be getting, I would want to know that. I usually am aware of that because I can see how much wasted water he's running over the top of his fields. But is it legal to post over water use? And can you report the 6,000 foot over pumping on a board where people can go to, and then you have public insight? And people don't like to be shamed. And is it legal to do that? Thank you.
Well, it's water is a public resource. It's owned by the public. The water right is the right to use it, and you got to keep that use within the terms of your permit. So I think it's legal to share that information. My reaction to that is, we as a state agency are stretched really thin across the state, trying to do just our basic statutory required duties. And yeah, though we could do that, we have to prioritize what we do and serve the public in the best way that we possibly can. But that said, water use, any data that's in our office is a public record, and we can make that available to you. If there's a specific question you want us to look at.
I'll add to that. We do publish pumpage inventories annually. Where Adam alluded to our staff shortage, so we're not quite up to date. We're maybe a year and a half behind, but all the data is posted publicly on our website under pumpage inventories. And additionally, we are working to get pumpage by well posted back up to our website. We used to have it on our Walker River Smith Mason hydro map. But we had a change in our IT system essentially. So that'll be coming back in the future. But reach out to me if you want any pumpage data, and I'll get it to you.
Jerry M. And so question I have is the pumping that the losses and from going from gaining reaches to lost reaches. Is the Division of Water Resources putting together some type of plan or monitoring or to show that the differences where it's coming from with the groundwater versus the decree and what the impact is there modeling that's going on, or is there an effort to, or is there going to be an effort, because that's going to be the big issue is you have the surface water decree, which goes back into the 1859 to where the groundwater decrees start in the 1940s or wherever. And so that's going to be, that came up as a big question in the last court case. And so I was just wondering, is the state working to modeling, or is there somebody else? Because I don't know who else would be doing that to put that together.
Thanks, Jerry. So right now, what we have going related to that question is there is a report that's in review that the USGS has, that those figures I showed earlier. So it's a study that's going to be released sometime in the next 6 months or so. So that'll be that report, which is going to highlight some of that information and indicate what's going on with the big picture. And I think, Jerry, what you're asking for is more of a smaller scale, what's going on along each of the reaches. And if we're developing any tools for being able to pinpoint some of the problems. And to answer that question is it's early in the process for that. There's conversations about, okay, what information do we need? What tools do we need to help the water users out here to understand that, whatever actions they're thinking about, what would it do to the system? How would the system react to it? Because groundwater, surface water, it's all connected. It's really complex. It's really hard to just say, oh, if you do this, this is how the system's going to change. And so there are tools that we have. We have some older existing models that we're going to look at to see if they can reproduce the conditions we're seeing on the ground right now. And then evaluating that and see if they need to be updated to be able to more accurately represent that. And then once that's the discussion we're having right now, and is what kind of tools and what kind of information do we need to get for everybody to be able to take the actions that are needed to help the system respond better to these droughts.
Yeah, if there's any questions from anybody on the Zoom call, feel free to unmute and ask a question. Everybody else in the audience. Go ahead.
Thank you. My name is Harry Hunt. I live in Mason Valley. My question is regarding the proposed copper mine that's been proposed for the Smith Valley area. And I wonder if you're familiar with it, and are you evaluating what the impact will be to the water levels in both valleys here in Smith Valley if that copper mine goes forward? Thank you.
Yeah, we had a lot of conversation, questions about this the other evening in Smith Valley. There was concern or misconception. And short answer is we've heard secondhand about the proposed copper mine, but they have not approached us with any water rights applications or change applications or reports of conveyance showing ownership. But simply put, in order for that operation to go forward, they would have to follow the same water laws that everybody else does. And there isn't the volume of water that we've heard, there is a new water available to appropriate. The only way that could happen would be by acquiring existing rights and moving those rights from wherever they are now to where the proposed mine is. I'll answer the question. Thank you.
I guess I'll add to that, that whenever there's a water right application these days in our office, we look at them and look at them with respect to other water rights and what the impacts are. We do analysis. Change applications that might have an impact on other water rights. So we go through the same process that all the other water rights go through. No, there's more questions out there.
Just don't want to go.
Yeah, you don't want to go to my, if you want, just call them out. We'll repeat them.
I'm concerned about contamination of the water aquifer. Mine, I mean, we have a perfect example right here. So, I mean, what process for water protection do they have to go through to do the mine? Who wants a repeat of what we have already?
Yeah, so I mean, developing a mine is a really complicated, highly regulated process, and that would be part of the, I guess, the BLM environmental assessment process and the Nevada Division of Environmental Protection mining regulation process, and so they would have to overcome, meet those standards too, as well as the water quantity and potential impacts with other existing water rights, which that's what we are responsible for.
Water, pumping water out has nothing to do with contamination. When they get down to the water aquifer.
Yeah, there
I
could be
mean,
some.
what can be
overlap.
done to protect the water aquifer?
Well,
That's-
yeah, I mean, you raise a good point. I guess the one thing I would say is, it's our Nevada Division of Environmental Protection, our sister agency. That's their focus is environment and the protection of the water quality. Out of our realm, that is squarely in their realm. But the one thing I would say is that, the regulations towards that kind of thing, there's a lot more of them nowadays, which for better or for worse, there's a lot more steps in place that the mines have to follow in order to ensure that they're not going to be contaminating the system. And so the regulatory framework's a lot different now than it was, 30, 40 years ago. So maybe that would help. I can't say that would, but
Yeah, unfortunately, we're suffering still.
Well, if there's no other questions, we are not rushing out of here right away. If you want to stick around and ask any other questions, we can do that. But thanks for being here and for your attendance. And, have a good evening.
thanks to folks who attended online too. Well done.